are we creating shareable content that when people see, not only they're going to give it a like and just scroll to the next one, but like, whoa, I need to send this to somebody.
What Adam is saying is that out of all the forms of engagement, shares is the one that you really want.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Beyond Social podcast, the show where we talk about going behind the scenes, building an awesome tool for marketers. I'm Reggie, one of your hosts, and today Vitaly and I are going to be talking about social metrics. What are the metrics that matter most for you, your organization, your efforts? And I'm excited to dive in. I know we hear about so many different metrics: followers, engagement, impressions. We're probably not going to dive into things like attribution, sales, and things like that today. But I definitely want to hear from you. What are kind of some of the things that you hear around a lot? And let's maybe dive into a couple.
Sure. Ultimately, the brands and businesses, as you make your investments into marketing on social, the question comes up, what exactly are you supposed to be looking at to determine if you are making progress with your social media presence? Ultimately, you would want proof in terms of attribution to your conversions or sales and all of that stuff as well. And that sort of falls slightly outside of the scope of this discussion, but also outside of the scope of social metrics per se. But you would want to be looking at your data, your reports for your social profiles, and try to determine what ultimately is happening, and if you are making that forward progress with your social. And you're right, we've heard everything from, and we see metrics like followers, we see metrics like engagement and impressions, and seemingly they all are interesting, right? And we are here to sort of offer some guidance as to perhaps more important and less important metrics that perhaps are easier to get but don't necessarily deliver as much value for you longer term, and metrics that are ultimately a game changer, right? And that's why we're here.
Yeah, and I think maybe we can start on followers. We hear that a lot.
Sure.
Probably been hearing that for over a decade at this point. How important is followers? Where does this kind of fit into the spectrum of the most important metric? I know there's a lot of nuances around follower growth. Let's talk about that.
I mean, followers are important, right? Without a doubt, the more followers you have, right, the higher the chances, right, of other things happening, right? If you only have 10 followers versus if you have 10,000 followers, right, all sorts of different things will happen. While ultimately you would want to have a very large number of followers, there is a question of other reasonable or legit ways of getting those followers, and should you consider any sort of shortcuts with respect to getting those followers? And obviously there are plenty of tools that allow you to purchase followers, obtain followers. Some organizations will make you look at the followers as a measure of success, but ultimately more followers is an indicator that people are genuinely interested and whatever message you have to sort of put out there. And if your followers aren't growing, or if you are not sort of, having the right followers or something, the issue is not in what strategies you are using to acquire more followers. The issue is in what content you are producing and why is it not resonating. There are probably ways to amplify or to sort of speed up the process of follower acquisitions through boosting and through non-organic means, for sure. But ultimately, followers is not necessarily a metric sort of in and of itself. That is a goal. Followers is like a good indicator that other things are working.
Yeah, probably not. Well, I mean, I want to pause here because I'm sure there's a lot of marketers who heard this and like, follower growth is not the most important. They're outraged that we even brought it up, that you should have as much followers as possible. Hang on, we're stay here with us. We're going to keep diving in. But I think you're right? Like the ultimate goal as an organization, whether you're selling a product or a service, is I need to be in front of as many eyeballs as possible. But it does come down to getting in front of the right eyeballs.
Correct.
If the people that are following me aren't going to eventually, at one point or another, take action because they're not the kind of people that my product or services are directed to, then was kind of the point, right?
So, and I think you're leading into that second, right, metrics that people always ask about, right, and we always talk about is engagement, right? So engagement is simple, right? That is, how many people liked and commented and shared your content. A good sort of bad indicator, right? Good in a way that if you see it, that something is happening that's not really good, is to look at a profile of a competitor or to look even at your own social profiles. Just simply scroll down the posts and see how many likes, comments, and shares your posts have had, right? And if that number is low, and sort of don't get necessarily frustrated with the fact that it's low. Let's say you have 10,000 followers and your posts are getting 20, 30 likes on average. It seems awfully small. It almost feels like, hey, listen, 1% of my followers is liking my content. It is pretty low, and it's going to continue to be low. Most likely, social media is a busy place to be, and your content could easily get drowned out. And there are some strategies around how to recycle content and how to repeat content, get more people to, your followers to kind of see it. But ultimately, those numbers are going to be low. 1-2%. I think the average is probably about 3% in the industry. But you might find yourself or your competitors to be in a situation where they have none. Right? And that's when you know that there are serious issues, right, with the execution of a strategy. So being somewhere in the 1-3% points of your followers, that's reasonable, right? Having nothing, or having only your own employees somehow engage, or your own marketing team be the only engagees there, that's how you're going to know you got some trouble.
Yeah. So Alexis on our marketing team, myself and her, had a little bit of a conversation recently. Unpopular opinion, for sure. The whole concept of shadowban, we hear that a lot on social. Like, oh, my brand, my profile, they're getting no engagement. I've gotten shadowbanned.
Right.
And listen, look, there's maybe a 0.5% chance that is the case for a brand out there, but more likely than not, like you're saying, there's a content strategy thing here at play that needs to be revisited, right? Just like everything changes over a period of time. Your audience's likes and dislikes or preferences change. So if you're producing the same amount of content, the same type of content over several period of time, a very, very long period of time, it's time to really revisit, right? Does this still resonate with the pain points of my audience or the challenges? Is this still entertaining? Whatever it is. Have I been trying to get to this trending sound 6 months later, right? Am I trying to do these trending reels way past their expiration date? Things like that. But I think that's a good point, right? Engagement. And as we dive into engagement, I think there's different ways that people like to calculate it. There's engagement over followers. There's engagement as it relates to impressions or reach. But I think ultimately when we look at, I think we talked about an example. I've got, 1,000 followers. You've got 100,000 followers on, let's just say Instagram for this example. And we both got 10 likes and maybe 1 or 2 comments. There's something wrong with the larger account. With the larger account, absolutely, right? So how does reach, I guess, come into play, would you say?
Yeah, for sure. I just want to quickly address the shadow banning suggestion, right? Unless you did something that you could get shadow banned for, right? Unless there is a reason for you to suspect that, posting copyrighted content or posting too frequently, or let's say maybe you've been using some semi-legal automated tools, bots. If that's happening, you have reason to suspect that Instagram or a social network is onto you. If nothing like that has happened, to justify lack of results by a theory around you being shadow banned, right? I mean, you're small of a presence, and I'm assuming at that point, like, you're not a huge brand. Like, the fact that you got noticed to be shadow banned, that's already a bit of a misnomer, right? I mean, you have to be somewhat significant, right, to be shadow banned. So in any case, I think it's a nice theory. I find it perhaps more of an excuse sometimes for why something is not happening. Because, like, listen, if you can claim that shadow banning is in place, then you're no longer responsible. You just got to wait for that to sort of not occur anymore. But ultimately, it is you, right, and your content and your methodology of getting your message out there. And mind you, it's not only just putting the post out there, right? It's community engagement. It's, starting the conversations with people. There is so much work that goes into building a brand that's not just putting out a content, right? But in any case, that was just a point on shadow banning. But with respect to the engagement rate, you're right. So I've personally seen a number of ways that people justify and try to rationalize engagement. One is, for example, is how much engagement do I get per post? Like, for example, I want an average of 20, 30 likes and whatnot, right, per post. I think that's very reasonable, right? It's a very reasonable way of looking at it. And if you're not getting that consistent average, or let's say if you have an outlier here and there, with let's say 10 times that, or the zero going all the way to zero, you got a winner or you got a loser, and where's your audience? You are right that it's not a stale kind of a world where you will have to adjust always. So even if you are seeing occasional decline or a change of scenery with respect to content, is certainly a good thing to have. So per post engagement, per piece of content is interesting. So I think you already spoke the per followers. That's also quite interesting, right? So because in relative terms, you can kind of determine how well you're doing. So for example, in our industry benchmarks, you can look at that, right? And you would know, let's say you are a plumber, like your brand does plumbing, you can look to see in your industry what's an average engagement rate with respect to the followers is. So if you have 10,000 followers, it's 3%, right? Versus if you are looking at your own content and your own presence or of that of the competitor, right? And you see nothing, right? Or you see extremely low numbers, then that either gives you confidence or takes it away, depending on which side of the equation you end up on, right? But for example, in our case, for Vista Social, I can look at some of our competitors who have sometimes 10x the followers that we have, but the engagement is lower.
Yeah.
Right? Which tells me that their strategy is less effective than ours. And I'm sure there are other tools that do better than us. So it's really, it's a big pond and we just a fish in it, right? But ultimately, yes. So ultimately, it's the engagement as it relates to, like on a proposed basis, as it relates to the followers. But I think the best and the most accurate one, and that's the one that we use in Vista, is to consider engagement as it relates to the impressions. So meaning that if your post gets seen by 10,000 people, not follow, because remember that post doesn't get only seen by followers, right? It gets seen by, a number of people because somebody liked it and whatnot. So maybe you boosted it, right? And for that reason, you got even more for it. So even more reason to see the engagement relative to the impressions, right? All right, so for 10,000 impressions, we've seen, 50 likes, and that and then tomorrow when you boosted it again and you went from 10,000 impressions to 100,000 impressions, you 10x the impressions, you kind of want the engagement rate to 10x as well. So that is a really great metrics, perhaps very appropriate when you're boosting more so than when you're doing things organically, but still a very sort of valuable piece of information, because let's say you do have a follower out there, but he didn't see your post, right? So even though you have 10,000 followers, you may end up with like 1,000 impressions, right? So to consider all followers as possible sort of targets here, that's kind of difficult. I mean, they may have their phone turned off. By the time they check their feed in the evening, your content was further down. It's just not fair. So impressions will give you much more accurate numbers to actually seeing it. And out of that, right, how many people liked it. So that's kind of what we prefer to kind of look at. But I think any one of them is still valuable. Again, the proposed, the followers, the impression based.
Yeah. I think most social networks right now too, I mean, has been the trend. You're very unlikely to get the amount of reach or impressions that are equal to or greater than your follower count, right? Obviously, mind you, now with algorithms like what we see on Reels or on TikTok posts who recommend beyond your existing followers, and that.
But I think when people like content, so if I like something on LinkedIn that Vista Social posted, you will actually see that I liked it.
Right. I will.
And it will show up in your feed, even if you're not a follower.
Right.
So that's when the impressions could be higher
than your follower
than the follower count. But I think even that is not necessarily the best way, sort of mathematically. So these are disjoint sets. Like you have 10,000 followers, 10,000 people, 10,000 targets. and you've gotten, let's say, 10,000 impressions, it does not mean that it's the same 10,000 people, right? It could have been 5,000 of these guys plus another 5,000 of the other ones, which saw it because these 5,000 liked it, commented on it, and whatnot. So to come back to the follower metric, you can see how this notion of large number of followers is even less relevant. Mm-hmm. To some extent, maybe we should just then say that impressions is a much more interesting metric than followers, right? Because impressions is what's truly creating the potential for engagement, right? Again, 10,000 followers may mean 0 impressions,
right?
Just because nobody was there for whatever reason. It's an extreme example, but certainly impressions is very interesting as well.
Yeah. So I guess people who thought about dropping off in the beginning when we said that followers is an important metric, you're here with us, maybe you're like, okay, this makes sense. But absolutely, right? And I think about the fact that when you're building a brand, you're building a follower base. The ultimate goal is, like I said before, to take action, to buy your product, buy your service, engage with you. And it's about building a community. I think a lot of the times where we see low impressions, low engagement, it's a lot of like megaphone strategy. I'm sitting here blasting my content out, and not a lot of engaging with the community, because that part is so important. It's about building a community. It's about building a community that's engaging, that enjoys seeing the content that you're producing. So it also plays into the strategy that we talk about. It shouldn't always be about selling your product. It's about contributing. It's education. It's entertainment. I mean, depending on the network you're on, most people are going, let's say TikTok, to be entertained. And obviously when we see content that like, whoa, I just learned something, I'm more likely to maybe share something like that as well, right? Which I guess maybe goes into the next one that we want to talk about, which is sharing, right?
Sharing, yeah. So I think just a quick point on that, on the strategy piece. I think in a lot of the demos and training sessions that we do, right? Anytime we discuss metrics and anytime we kind of look at the social media presence for a brand, and one of the first things that would be noticeable and something that we already discussed today is lack of engagement on posts. Mm-hmm. Just generally, right? You're posting, and there is nothing, right? Not as it relates to followers, just nothing. There are no likes or very little likes. And in the conversations, typically, what I've sort of noticed is that there is this misunderstanding of the differences between the web marketing and the social media marketing. And maybe more specifically with respect to the web content versus content for your blog and content for your website versus content for your social, right? People from the web, like the web world, right, is all about volume, tricking the algorithms, and getting people onto the web page, right, when they search. So that way you can sell them something, or push a pop-up or retarget them later, right? Even the fact that they've seen it is already good enough because you can then retarget it. It's a very different game, right? Where you can put out the most uninteresting piece of content that somehow is a superb performer when it comes to keyword density, and somehow Google views it as an amazing resource for a certain topic. Person arrived at the article, even if he didn't or she didn't necessarily perform the action that you wanted, the fact that they're there is already good result, or even an amazing result, because you can then retarget to people, right? Compare that with the social media world, right? Where you can put out as much content as you want, and you can have amazing keyword density. But if I am ultimately, like, as you're scrolling through the feed, if you see my content and it doesn't necessarily resonate with you, you're just gonna scroll right past it.
Yep.
Right? So, and you're not going to enter it, you're not going to like it. And if you're not going to engage with it, something else that we haven't really talked about, like, why do you want that engagement, right? Why do you want people to actually like and comment the post? Because that informs the algorithms, right? And that what ultimately is going to increase the chances of your content seen by others, your pages get ranked, within networks better. So while it is a metric that you care about, whether it's in, your social presence is improving, or, has a certain propensity to do better in time, having that engagement also informs the. So why do you want, for example, more likes than your competitor? If you have more likes than your competitor, it's more likely that the algorithms will recommend your content next time to people, right, than the competitor. So that's the natural game, right? But if you are not caring about people, and for example, you're not going to like a content that you're not going to like. I mean, it's a very simple logic, right?
Yeah.
So if you're not invested into creating content that is interesting
Yeah.
and that resonates, right? And there is no way to cheat this, right? There is absolutely no way. There's no way to hire writers that produce uninteresting content. You literally have to sit there and think, or in your marketing team, of what content will resonate. And it's a constant discovery and search. And you're going to have to, probably do some work and experimentation to even find that something, right? And you might find something that is completely not what you've expected to begin with, right? But ultimately, that's what you're going to need to do, right? To win over likes, which would then push your content further, more people come in, you produce even more, and it's a snowball that just begins to roll, right?
Right.
And with respect to some insights recently provided by the founder of Instagram, I think you were gonna mention that video in the article and the concept. So,
right. Yeah, because I mean, one of the metrics, right, we keep talking about is how do these metrics play into getting my content in front of more people, more eyeballs, right? And we talk about likes and we talk about comments. But Adam, head of Instagram, recently put a post that we'll watch, but it has an interesting proposition, right? Which is, this is a specific metric that he suggests, at least on Instagram, it makes your post more likely to be seen by other people. So I'll play that real quick.
Some advice. One of the most important signals we use in ranking is sends per reach. So out of all the people who saw your reel or your photo, how many of them sent it to a friend in a DM? At Instagram, we're trying to be a place where people can be creative, but in a way that brings people together. We want not only to be a place where you passively consume content, but where you discover things you want to tell your friends about. A reel that made you laugh so hard you wanted to send it to your brother or your sister. Or a soccer highlight that blew your mind and you wanted to send it to another fan. That kind of thing. So don't force it as a creator, but if you can, when you're making content, think about making content that people would want to send to a friend, to someone that they care about. And it will help you reach over time. More advice to come. Peace.
So that was interesting. When I saw it the first time, it clicked. It made sense to me, right? Because I'm probably one of those people that they make memes about, which is I'll sit there, go on Instagram for 30 minutes, and my brother or my wife will end up with 50 reels in their DMs of things that I thought were hilarious. I'm a new dad, so I'll send funny or cool baby gadgets to my wife, stuff like that, right? But that's the point, I guess, right? It's about, are we creating shareable content that when people see, not only they're going to give it a like and just scroll to the next one, but like, whoa, I need to send this to somebody. And that ultimately, I think, is what creates that engaging audience, the audience that helps to get your content in front of more eyeballs, but as far as what Adam is saying, informs the algorithm that this is what we need to show more people.
Right. I think Instagram, but realistically, any social networks sort of key objective, right, is to create a platform where you would want to spend as much time as possible, right? The only way for them to do that, if they can show you, right, the content that you will find interesting. So how do they do that while millions of reels and videos get uploaded daily, right? Yeah. How do they look at all that volume of content, right, and determine what content is truly interesting to Reggie, right, or to anybody, right? And is it the one where a profile is posting 50 times a day? Unlikely, right?
Right.
Is it the one where Reggie's interests match with the most? Too big of a number. Yeah. I'm sure there are millions such profiles, at least that claim to be interesting to Reggie, right? Plus, it's a self-claim. I mean, where's the truth? Is it the one where people like the content a lot? I think we're getting closer with that. Instagram could say, listen, if there is a piece of content that is matched for Reggie and it was liked and commented by a lot of people, right? This is now, we are getting into the territory of something that is particularly, that could be interesting. But it's passivity, or the fact that liking is quick, right?
Yeah.
Is perhaps like the first, you get like 1 point for that, right? And then if the person cared about that enough to leave a comment, right, perhaps that's like 2 points, right? And if they cared about it enough to share it with their friends, as far as the Instagram or any kind of social network is concerned, that's the strongest signal that that is something that people are willing to share, that's going to be interesting to their friends and followers, right? So if you think about that sort of system of scoring, right, then that's how content gets identified, right, as being the best, the strongest, right? That's the strongest signal, right, that they can use. As you are producing content, and that's kind of where we began the conversation, right? And we said, listen, you want to look at the engagement, right? Likes, comments, but ultimately the shares, right? So shares are ultimately in the case of Instagram, it's a share in the DM. And while other networks did not come out so publicly and admit to this, I would strongly suspect that sharing of any kind within the network is probably the strongest signal of them all, right? And yes, so if you have your content and you see quite a bit of sharing within it, then chances are you're going to do quite well relatively soon. But as Adam pointed out, right, it's something you have to design your content for, right? So what makes people share content in whatever space you're in, right? Let's say you are a realtor, right? What content would make people share this stuff? Perhaps it's going to be a construction problem. Perhaps it could be like a typical mortgage question that people kind of have, right? An anecdote, but that's kind of the frame of mind when you are designing content, right? Not just some, very standard, very sort of uninteresting, even though it will get impressions. It may even get a few likes, but will it truly get that really the most important, right, piece of engagement, which is the sharing to friends?
Yeah. And so as you're thinking through maybe and building out your strategy, or even just analyzing your posts for the last month or two, tagging or labeling or just categorizing your posts that had the highest cents per reach, right, or shares per reach, could be a really good step forward in understanding what's working. At least for right now, for this season in my brand, this type of content, when I share about the mortgage tips, I tend to get a lot more shares per impression or per reach, right? Versus when I share, I don't know, right, the construction updates, right? Analyzing that, really figuring out the ones that resonate the most with the audience could be a really good way forward. And not necessarily that I can only post this type of content, but really understanding what about this? What about, was it the tone? Was it the way that it was created? Was it the way that we presented the content? How can I try to replicate this sort of style into some other things, right? To try to get a little bit more sense out of my post, right?
Yeah, and I think that also what to do, I guess, in the case when your content isn't reshared.
Right.
Do you get discouraged, right? Do you kind of view it as underperformance? It's probably not underperformance in the most sort of serious sort of way. Perhaps funny content may be more shareable than, let's say, more kind of thoughtful, perhaps academic or informational content, right? You're probably more likely to share a funny video than you are an article on mortgage rates or something. There might be some natural kind of barriers to high sort of sharing of content. So I wouldn't necessarily get discouraged by content not getting shared, but I think realizing the algorithms, the impact that shares have on algorithms, right? And ultimately, not only do you care about those extra followers or those extra impressions or that engagement rate, you care about them because algorithms, meaning that Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, ultimately they use that, right, to push your content further. That's why, like any YouTuber out there, one of the first things they say, please, put a like on my video. They take pauses. Please put a like. Why? Because that informs algorithms. And that's kind of what this is about. And I think what Adam is saying is that out of all the forms of engagement, shares is the one that you really want. So even if you get one share for every 100 likes, it's still something.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an indication, right? It's an indicator. I do want to real quick touch on the, maybe you're stuck and you're not getting a lot of shares, and obviously funny content, like you said. There's a lot of types of content that get a lot more shares than, let's say, the more informational, educational. And so I'm going to bring an example that I think is maybe people don't think about, but like the news. Okay. And I'm not going to get political or anything like that, but Morning Brew is a newsletter that tries to give you snippets of top level news in your inbox every morning. And I'll be honest, I subscribed a while ago. I don't really read it. So apologies there, Morning Brew, if you're watching this. My wife loves it. But somehow they ended up on my YouTube Shorts algorithm. And their social team has found a way to make the most, let's say, seemingly boring news into very entertaining content, where at the end of it, I get a good laugh, but I just learned something about what's going on in the news, right? And they've found a way to do this repeatedly, day in and day out. It's like the most randomest pieces of news, right? Like the IT breach, right? Or the IT situation that happened with all these airlines last week were struggling. Like flights got canceled, got shut down. And they found a way to make it funny. They played into, I'm gonna share this news through the light of someone who works remotely and uses Microsoft Teams, and they're like, how come I have to work today? Everybody else isn't working, but my stuff's, So I really kind of challenge brands when they're thinking through, hey, my content's not the kind of content that I can make entertaining. I don't necessarily know that that's true. I think that there's a way to position content. Maybe it's not every post, obviously, right? But there's a way to position your content in a way that can push the same type of information across, that can teach someone something, educate them on something, but still be entertaining, that at the end of the day, they learned about what your brand offers, what you do, they get a good chuckle, and maybe they end up sending it to somebody, right?
Yeah. I think humor is a powerful marketing tool. And I think it certainly improves the chances of content to be more relatable, right? And so I think that example is just an example of how humor could be a massive, and I'm not necessarily academically schooled in marketing, but I feel like the types of ads that I respond to have significant amount of humor to them. So I would imagine that that's just a natural sort of naturally effective way of marketing something is through humor.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you heard it here. You heard it from Adam, obviously. Shareable content matters. But thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Don't forget to share. When we talked about sharing, send this to somebody, inform the algorithm that, Beyond Social should be recommended more on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you are consuming this content. Make sure to leave us some feedback. And if you have an idea, suggestion of something that you want us to cover in an upcoming episode, or if you want to join Vitaly and I for a future episode, head over to vistasocial.com/podcast, and we'll see you next week.